My name is Bond. James Bond.
Bond. James Bond.
Bond. James Bond.
Poirot. Hercule Poirot.
When you think of an Agatha Christie story, you think of something along the lines of Knives Out or Clue, but there's one early book of hers that raises the question of whether the Poirot series could have taken a very different turn. The Big Four was published in 1924 in a serialized format, then came out in book form in 1927. It was the fourth Poirot novel, but chronologically it's the third in the series, taking place between the murder on the Links and the murder of Roger Ackroyd. It was adapted for TV in 2013, with a teleplay by Mark Gatiss. I'm going to tell you right away, the movie is very different from the book. Thank heavens. Not that the book is bad, but, well, you'll see. The book is narrated by Captain Hastings, who used to be Poirot's assistant and is now married and living in Argentina. He returns to England to give Poirot a surprise visit, but he's not Poirot's only visitor. A vagabond breaks in and babbles about a criminal organization headed by 4 people, nicknamed the Big Four. Shortly thereafter, he dies, murdered by a second intruder. An attempt is made to convince Poirot that the man is an escaped lunatic spouting nonsense, but Inspector Japp identifies him as Mayerling, a Secret Service agent. Poirot is convinced Mayerling was speaking the truth, and he resolves to find out why the Big Four wanted to silence him. Early on in the book, we see parallels with Sherlock Holmes. Poirot refers to himself as a consulting detective.
I'm a consulting detective. The only one in the world that invented the job.
What does that mean?
It means when the police are out of their depth, which is always, they consult me.
The Big Four are reminiscent of Moriarty, the mastermind of a vast criminal organization, but quadrupled. There are other signs throughout her work that Christie was inspired by Arthur Conan Doyle, but the result in this case is more similar to Ian Fleming. Li Chang Yen is the controlling and motive force. I have designated him therefore as number 1. Number 2 is an American subject. He represents the power of wealth. Number 3 is a woman, and her nationality French.
Come in, Kronstein. Sit down, number 3, while we listen to what number 5 has devised for us.
What follows is a series of adventures involving disappearing scientists, doomsday weapons, and getting caught by mad scientist supervillains. Now, I've read most of the James Bond novels, and this book feels more like James Bond than they do. At one point, Poirot and Hastings escape capture by using, I kid you not, a poisoned dart inside a cigarette.
Armed guards to control room.
It can save your life, this cigarette.
Taken as a whole, the book feels disjointed, its plot contrived. Individually, though, despite the ever-increasing spy themes, the chapters work very well as short murder mysteries. Now, you're probably thinking there's one way in which Poirot bears absolutely no resemblance to James Bond, and that's the romance department. And I admit you have me there. Except... Countess Vera Rosikoff was introduced in the Poirot short story The Double Clue. After the events of that story, she and Poirot remain on somewhat friendly terms. When she appears in this novel, she's an agent of the Big Four, but in the end, Poirot manages to sway her loyalty, and she becomes an ally. There's no actual romance between them, though it's hinted multiple times that there's at least a mutual attraction. Disappointingly, she does not appear in the film. In fact, neither does Hastings. Well, he does, but barely. But before we talk about the film, we have to talk about something else. When the TV series Agatha Christie's Poirot began in 1989, it had 4 regulars: Poirot, Captain Hastings, Inspector Japp, and Miss Lemon, Poirot's secretary. The 3 co-stars appeared pretty regularly up to 2002. If those characters weren't in the stories being adapted, they were usually added in, or they replaced existing ones. This didn't always help the story, but it did help deepen the main characters and endeared them to many fans. However, after 2002, David Suchet's co-stars vanished from the show. Time and again, Poirot solved his cases solo, with occasional assistance from recurring character Ariadne Oliver. Not until the show's very last season was the old gang reunited, and it happened in the film version of The Big Four. It's too bad we never got to see Mrs. Oliver interact with them. The movie begins with Hastings, Miss Lemon, and Inspector Japp, who's now the Assistant Commissioner of Scotland Yard, mourning the loss of Poirot, who has apparently died. Poirot's manservant George is also present. He appeared in several novels and was elevated to a regular late in the TV series. Then we rewind 4 weeks to find out what events led up to this. Right away there's a marked difference in tone. In the book, Poirot investigated several suspicious deaths of people who had remote connections to the Big Four. The implication was that anyone could be silenced for even casually mentioning the organization and giving away the secret of its existence. Here, the Big Four is already a widespread rumor, even appearing in newspapers. The film introduces a new character, a reporter named Tyso, who is investigating the rumor. In the book, throughout the episodic encounters with the Big Four, Poirot gradually uncovers the identities of the four leaders. Here, Tyso already suspects who the leaders are, 3 of them anyway, and they're the leaders of the so-called Peace Party, reflecting the impending threat of war that was present in the 1930s, something that the book, written in the 1920s, completely lacked. The bulk of the film draws from 3 specific episodes in the novel. First, we have the death of a famous chess player, electrocuted by a chess piece and table that have been tampered with. Then we have the murder of a biographer, followed by a much more grisly murder. In the book, each of these mysteries concludes with the revelation that someone on the scene was in reality Number 4, the organization's assassin, also called the Destroyer. Since Number 4 is as proficient in disguise as he is deadly, he can appear again and again as different characters, which as a plot device is pretty ingenious. In each film sequence, minor details are changed from the book, but taken by themselves, each one is a faithful adaptation. The changes to the overall story are drastic, but the premise is somehow preserved. Without the spy elements and the constant hints that the Big Four are secretly running the world from behind the scenes, the story feels, ironically, more like Agatha Christie than did the novel. Is it a good adaptation? I'll be honest, I'm not sure. It doesn't translate the original story by any means, but it feels more like it belongs in the Agatha Christie world than the novel does. Personally, I'm really happy with it. Except for one thing. At this point in the saga, Captain Hastings had narrated almost every single Poirot novel and short story. The Big Four was the culmination of their adventures together. There wasn't much, if anything, that I was hoping to see in the adaptation, but I was looking forward to seeing the 2 of them teamed up again, the original duo. So it was sad that in the end, Hastings had so little screen time. Poirot does seem to die in the book, so at least we got Hastings' reaction to that in the film. Then Poirot reveals that he's still alive, and the 2 of them end up in the Big Four's underground lair beneath the Dolomites. Poirot manages to lead an assault team to the base, and the Big Four are defeated. The Big Four decide to destroy their own headquarters, and themselves, presumably, rather than be captured. The world is saved! There was also something in there about Poirot having a twin brother, but meh. The film goes in a different direction. It takes a minor character from the book, one of the murder victims, in fact, a young woman named Flossie Monroe, who happened to know Number 4's true identity, so she was killed off, and it enlarges her role considerably. It turns out the murderer had a crush on her, so he invented the Big Four and killed all those people just to get her attention. The other people thought to be the criminal leaders? Just innocent people. Poirot reveals he's still alive and sets a trap for the murderer, and... where is Hastings? Seriously, why is he not here? They made a big deal about him coming back into Poirot's world, so why is he absent from the climax?
We can't let Poirot die in vain. We've got to stop them.
Now, hang on, Captain Hastings.
We can't be faint-hearted now, man. Are you with me or not? For Poirot's sake, together, we have to stop the Big Four. Well, if you won't do anything to stop these brutes, then I certainly will. And I'll leave no stone unturned. Good day.
I don't know how, but they should have found a way to get Hastings to figure in the denouement. I would have even been happy if he'd just shown up at the very last second to save Poirot the way Tyso does. Instead, he shows up in the last 20 seconds of the movie, so basically they could have left him out altogether. That is my one and only complaint. Otherwise, this is a decent entry in the TV series. Like the last Poirot novel adaptation I covered, this one makes drastic changes, but in this case, most of the changes serve to strengthen the story, making it feel more like Agatha Christie than 007. Bravo, Mark Gatiss. Before I go, there's one other thing I want to mention. Something that surprised me when I reread the novel was that the revelation in the recent film Death on the Nile, that Poirot's enormous mustache hides a facial scar, is actually true. This is partly why I suspect that the next Poirot film by Kenneth Branagh is in fact going to be The Big Four, possibly followed by the murder of Roger Ackroyd, given the reference to vegetable marrows. I admit, I don't really think that the Poirot stories would have ever started to resemble James Bond. However, you can bet that the Branagh adaptation will. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.